that an important question for you? Just think about this. What would you attempt to do if you knew you couldn't fail? Or let me ask it another way. What do you wish was true about your life that isn't? I think we all have answers to those questions that are important to us. Now, I don't mean answers like, if I knew I couldn't fail, I'd always play the lottery, or I wish it was true that I was married to a rock star. I mean, really, what would you try to do if you knew you couldn't fail? What do you wish was true about your life that isn't? Now, we can't ask that question without asking this follow-up. What's stopping you? I mean, what's holding you back? Maybe you'd say you don't have the time or the money. Maybe you feel like you don't have the right connections. Maybe you'd flat out say you just don't know what to do. I mean, we can come up with lots of reasons, but I think more times than not, there's another reason why we don't try to do what we really want to do, and why we don't try to make true what we really wish was true. Well, today we're continuing our series, The Lake Effect. Much of Jesus' ministry before his crucifixion and resurrection took place on the shores of Lake Gennesaret, also known as the Sea of Galilee. And in this series, we're looking at several key encounters that Jesus had with his followers to see what we can learn about what it means to follow him. And today's story is one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible. Here it is. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side. Later that night, he was there alone, and the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them, walking on the lake. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified. "It's a ghost," they said, and they cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, "Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid." "Lord, if it is you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." "Come," he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus reached out his hand and caught him. "You of little faith," he said, "why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down. Then those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." Jesus walks on the water. You know, I've heard that story dozens of times, but there's a detail about the story that I've often misunderstood. Until recently, I always thought of Peter getting out of the boat as something Jesus told him to do. What I often missed is that walking on the water was something Peter wanted to do. I mean, take a look at this again from Matthew 14. "Lord, if it's you," Peter replied, "tell me to come to you on the water." I mean, Peter's venture onto the water started when he saw Jesus doing it, and he decided it was something that he wanted to do too. So let me ask you again. What would you attempt to do if you knew you couldn't fail? What do you wish was true about your life that isn't? When it comes to the things we wish we could do, I believe all of us want to make a real difference in the world. I mean, I believe there are people who dream of using their gifts and talents to fulfill a purpose bigger than themselves. I believe that there are people who really want to be the kind of mom or dad or husband or wife or friend who is a real source of strength and encouragement to others. I mean, I believe there are people who'd love to invest themselves in an idea that could better their community or the world. But whatever it is we want to do, or we wish were true, here is the unfortunate reality. Often, we're not taking any real steps in that direction. I mean, let me tell you what I've found to be true in my own experience. I mean, sure, time or money or knowing what to do might be in the way. But beneath all of that, you know what I really think keeps me and most people I know from attempting what we most want to do and experiencing what we most wish was true? Fear. Fear that it'll be too hard. Fear that if I go for it, everything will fall apart. Fear that it's just not possible. But more accurately, it's not really the fear that stops us. What stops us is not having a way to overcome our fear. In this story, there are 12 guys in the boat, but only one who water walked with Jesus. And the difference between that one and the other 11 wasn't fear. I mean, they were all afraid. The difference between the one water walker and the 11 water walker wannabes was faith. Faith to move past the fear. Now think about it. Wouldn't you like to know how to have a faith to move past whatever is holding you back? I mean, wouldn't you like to know? Well, I'm glad you do. Because today that's what we're going to talk about is we're going to dig a little deeper into the story to see how Peter did it. Look where Peter's water walking started. I mean, in the face of fear, the first thing he did was to say out loud what he wanted to do. I mean, saying it out loud is often the beginning step of faith. It takes courage to say things out loud, doesn't it? I mean, think about how many great accomplishments in history had their beginning when someone stuck out their neck and said it out loud. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy said, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." In June of 1987, President Ronald Reagan stood at the Berlin Wall, the physical symbol of communism, and challenged Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. In 1964, 2 years into what would become 27 years in prison, Nelson Mandela stood in a courtroom and said, "I have dedicated my life to the struggle of the African people. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities." I mean, courageous words spoken by people who helped change the world. But don't be mistaken. I mean, when they spoke them, nothing was guaranteed. I mean, they had no idea how history would look back on their proclamations. It took courage to say it out loud, the same kind of courage it takes for you and I to speak our dreams and our desires. So let me ask you again, when it comes to what you really want to do, or what you really wish was true, have you said it out loud yet? Have you told anybody it's what you want to do, what you want to be true? I mean, that's where Peter's faith started. He said out loud what he wanted to do. To build your faith, let me encourage you to do the same. Say it out loud. Say it out loud to a friend. Say it out loud to a spouse or significant other. Say it out loud to your small group. I mean, don't put any qualifiers or disclaimers on it. Just say it. The first step of finding faith is to say it out loud. See, when you say it out loud, faith can begin to grow in you. I mean, if you think about it, saying it out loud is an act of faith, because not saying what you want is a way of playing it safe. Saying it out loud can get the wheels of faith turning. And saying it out loud is powerful, because when we do that, we give God the chance to say what Peter heard Jesus say. Come on, go for it. Let's do this. I mean, we might hear him say that through a godly friend who says, yes, you should do that. We might hear him say that through a circumstance that confirms it's time to take a step forward. We might hear him say that through a talk at church about walking on water. Maybe we never hear God say, come on, go for it, because we've never really said out loud what we want him to empower us to do. Say it out loud. A deeper faith starts there. And here's the next part of finding the faith for what things you most want to do or experience in your life. After Peter says, I want to do this, and Jesus says, come on, Peter does the next thing. He gets out of the boat. See, when it comes to faith, there are two main kinds of people: water walkers and boat people. You know what boat people do? Boat people say, I don't know, I've never tried before, or I've tried before and it didn't work. I mean, boat people say, I'd like to, but I just don't think I have the time. Boat people say, I've never done that before, it probably wouldn't work anyways. Boat people aren't going to go anywhere. Boat people aren't going to do anything. And it's not because they don't want to, it's because they won't get out of the boat. But water walkers get out of the boat. Max Lucado is a pastor and a best-selling author whose ministry has impacted thousands of people. But before all of that, he was a guy that was pretty far from God. And Max tells a personal story about when he was in high school. He was working a grimy summer job in the oil fields of Texas, immersing himself in the crass culture of his coworkers, when he encountered a water walker. During lunch one day, one of the bosses nervously but courageously approached Max's group. And here's how Max describes the incident years later when he wrote a letter to this unknown boss. He said this. He said, "You were nervous. You shifted your weight from one leg to the other as you began to speak. Fellows, you started. We turned and looked up at you. I just wanted to tell you that our church is having a service tonight, and I wanted to invite any of you to come along. Well, that's it. If any of you want to go, let me know." After you turned and left, we turned and laughed. You became the butt of that day's jokes. I'm sure you knew that. I'm sure you went back to your truck knowing the only good you'd done was to make a fool of yourself. And if that's what you thought, you were wrong. I want you to know that at least one of the seeds fell into a fertile crevice. Some 5 years later, I was a college sophomore struggling with a decision, drifted from my faith. I wanted to come back, but the price was high. My habits would have to change. My reputation would have to be overcome. I thought of how your love for God had been greater than your love for your reputation. I thought about how your obedience had been greater than your common sense. I remembered how you cared more about making disciples than about making a good first impression. And when I thought of you, your memory became my motivation, so I came home. What you did that day wasn't much, and I'm sure you walked away that day thinking your efforts had been wasted. They weren't. So I'm writing to say thanks. Thanks for the example. Thanks for the courage. Gratefully, Max. See, Max's boss, he wanted his life to be about helping people find their way back to God. And so he got out of the boat. And although he stumbled and stuttered and may not have known it at the time, he did some water walking that day. You see, when it comes to what you really want to do, or what you wish was true, the first thing to do is do something. Don't just sit and wish, do something. Doing something isn't about accomplishing something. It's about acting first so that faith can follow. It's about getting out of the boat. So those are the first two things for water walking. And the third thing for water walking, the third thing for finding faith happens after Peter gets out of the boat. Watch this. Peter gets out of the boat. He's out there on the water doing something that reflects the greatness of God. But then look what happens. He starts sinking like a rock. A fear creeps back in and he cries out, "Lord, save me." Those words, "Lord, save me," are in the extreme passive voice, which implies that when he starts to sink, he knew that he couldn't save himself. He fears that he's drowning in his own failure. Understand, when it comes to moving in the direction of our dreams and deepest desires, we have to be willing to fail. There is often an oxymoron in how we choose to follow Jesus. You see, many of us want to have faith. We just want it to be a safe faith. We want to step out in faith, but first we want to know that it's safe. But you see, there's no such thing as safe faith, because if I have faith that is safe, then what I have isn't really faith at all. Safe faith is a contradiction of terms. Faith is risky. Faith is precarious. Faith is exactly what we need when it is not safe. Faith will never make us safe from failure. Leadership expert John Maxwell says that there is one major difference between average people and achiever people, and it's in how they fail. He says that the average person fails backward, but those who achieve fail forward. Look at these two lists. Failing backward is about blaming others, repeating the same mistakes, expecting never to fail again, expecting to continually fail, accepting tradition blindly, or being limited by past mistakes, thinking I am a failure, or quitting. That's failing backward. Failing forward is about taking responsibility, learning from each mistake, knowing that failure is a part of the process, maintaining a positive attitude, challenging outdated assumptions, taking new risks, believing something didn't work, not that I'm a failure, and about persevering. Let me ask, which list describes your approach to failure? Failing backward or failing forward? Water walkers know that walking on water also comes with times when we'll sink beneath the waves. You can't walk on water if you're not willing to fail. I mean, if your dream is to rebuild a strained relationship, don't expect standing ovations from your son or your daughter or your mom or your dad or your spouse just for trying. I mean, expect skepticism, expect resistance, expect some pushback. If you have an idea inside of you that could change the lives of other people, expect people to be less than enthusiastic. Expect some doubt. Expect to fall on your face a time or two. If you dream of starting a new career, expect some roadblocks. Expect some rejection. Expect that there will be twists and turns that you hadn't anticipated. Helen Keller once said, "Life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all." Now, if you look up the word adventure in the dictionary, you'll find that it's defined as a bold, usually risky undertaking. If there's no risk you can fail, there's no adventure. And life is either a daring adventure or nothing at all. Peter's walk on the water was not devoid of danger. It was fraught with it. But it was a risk he was willing to take because of who he was walking toward. See, when Peter failed, Jesus did not let him sink to the bottom. That tells us the other thing we really need to know about finding the faith to become water walkers. And hear me on this, because this may be the one thing that God most wants you to hear today. In those moments when you are overwhelmed by fear, in those moments when you feel like you are sinking in failure, Jesus promises to reach out his hand and never let you go. God's promise to you and to me is this: I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you. The only guarantee God gives us in this life is the only guarantee we really need. I will never abandon you. I will never leave you alone. You see, water walkers stay focused on that. They center their lives around Jesus. They build their lives around the God who is the only person that can reliably say, I will never leave you. Water walkers get out of the boat and they risk it all because they know Jesus will never let them go. Yes, Peter got out of the boat. And yes, at one point it seemed like a very bad idea. He tried and he failed. But think about the other 11 who never even got out of the boat. I mean, they never were able to say, hey, remember that time I walked on water? I mean, don't you imagine that later in life, this story was one of Peter's favorite stories to tell? Don't you think whenever he talked about his life, that he loved to tell people about the time that he walked on the water? I bet the part of the story that he told most energetically, most passionately, was the part where Jesus showed him that he would never let him down. I don't know about you, but I don't want to spend my life in the boat. I mean, I know one day that this life will be over, and I'll stand personally before God and look back on how I've lived this one life I've been given. I want to look back and see a daring adventure, don't you? I mean, we can find the faith and the courage to get out of the boat, because here is what I know to be true. On that day when I stand before God, Jesus will do for me what he did for Peter. He will reach out and he will take my hand and never let go. Every Christ follower can know that's what's coming, no matter how much we risk or how often we fail. So until that day, let's remember that life is either a daring adventure or it's nothing at all. Let's get out of the boat. Let's take some risks. Let's have some stories to tell.